Yes? So Dr. King. So you might have a little bit more of a break between when I get done and when we have lab, when we Starbucks or something. What we'll do today is we'll go through this lecture. Then there's going to be a little, we'll call it activity, that we'll do today. We're going to start having an activity, quote unquote, with each class. And the whole point of it is just to get you out of your comfort zone a little bit and to make you start thinking about how to take history in real time. I have graded everyone's assignment, so we'll get that back today. And then I actually used somebody's, and I forget who I used. It was good, but it just kind of, if you would have worded things a little bit differently in terms of timeline, it's just, I'll show you how she wrote it, I don't have her name on there, and how I would have written it in terms of timeline of how to make things flow a little bit better, okay? So we'll move today, and today we're going to talk about the psychosocial, or what we always used to call the social history, which you'll see still that topic used quite a bit when you're talking about documentation within the hospital. And we'll talk about obtaining sexual history as well. So the objectives are just for psychosocial history, basically as it relates to the chief complaint, and how to develop a normal, non-creepy form of asking about a sexual history, because you have to obtain that on all patients. So we talk about what goes into a psychosocial history. Basically, it's the things that everybody kind of knows about. Are you married? Do you have kids? What do you do? Have you smoked? Do you drink? But it goes to drug use. It goes to a little bit to employment, because we'll talk about employment. It goes to military background. And then, of course, all your other things. Are you worried about domestic violence with this patient? We'll talk about a sexual history being separate. But even the level of education, any religious or cultural preferences that the patient has, maybe kind of obligations or commitments that the patient has that might dive or direct your therapy in a different way. So when you look at patients, outpatient versus inpatient, so hospital setting versus office setting, truly when you're typical in a hospital setting, you don't have as much time. You know, you're not going to sit there and sit down on the end of the bed with them and say, so, you know, I hear you're married. How long have you been married? Are you happily married? You know, you guys ever been to counseling before? Not that you ever need to ask that question, but you're never delving that deeply into that aspect of the social history of the patient when you're in a hospital setting. Truly, if we're talking more so emergent, cases, you need to know the things that are pertinent to their case. Do they have a history of tobacco use? Why? Because especially if you're talking about operating on that patient, you have to know that you can actually get them off the ventilator. Would always be nice, okay? You also have to know about alcohol history, you know. I had one patient one time that she drank a glass of wine a day. Well, by the 5th day, a glass of wine, according to her boyfriend, was a bottle, Monday through Friday, and a 1.5-liter bottle on Saturday and Sunday. Wow. And she was a CPA. So she was a smart chick, and she was involved in taking care of a lot of people's finances, not mine. But, you know, and then you're sitting there wondering why she's acting so bizarre. So your concern for that patient would be alcohol withdrawal once they've been in the hospital that long. I actually had one lady, and truly in the hospital, you can't order liquor, okay? But you can order beer and you can order wine at most hospitals. And I had one lady and she asked for a sangria, and they made it. So, because I asked her if she wanted red or white, and she said, I'd like a sangria. I said, I think that can be done. So it's cheaper to give that woman alcohol since she drinks every day than to deal with the ramifications of her going through alcohol withdrawal. And quite frankly, when she was in the hospital, it was not my job to deal with her alcoholism. It was my job to get her out of the hospital, okay? When we talk more about the patient who's in the office setting, different scenario, especially when you're meeting that patient for the first time. Your goal with meeting that patient for the first time is to truly develop a rapport. And from that point forward, if you're talking internal medicine, even if you're a subset of internal medicine, cardiology, pulmonology, your goal is to treat them over the course of years, not to treat them for a few days. So in that case, you do need to delve more into their psychosocial history, especially on that first encounter, because everything might just start to drive their diagnoses long term. For that person who is a chronic smoker, it may make a difference for you to actually have that dialogue with them about smoking cessation and really to repeat it every single time. Because if they actually stop smoking, maybe they will have a decreased risk of heart attack. Maybe they have a decreased risk for stroke. Okay? So you can start having more of that dialogue and therefore the education if you actually know what they do every day in their life. Okay? So when we talk about marital status, starting off with that one, always kind of makes, especially when you get to the sexual history dialogue, that a little bit easier. Okay? Are they married? Are they single? Are they divorced? Are they separated? Are they widowed? The key thing to know about whether someone is widowed, especially for your male patients, within that first year of the death of their spouse, the likelihood that they will become ill and or die is substantially higher than for women, okay? And it's not just because us girls can do everything. It's because most men never cooked, okay? So especially when you're talking about not your 30-year-olds that become widowed, I'm talking your 70, 80, 90-year-olds that become widowed. Because then you might be looking at a male patient who has horrible macular degeneration, and he would love to be able to stick something in the microwave, but he can't read the directions, okay? And so he doesn't know that it needs to go in for only 10 minutes. He just hits a button on the microwave and doesn't know what button he's hitting. So those are the types of things that you actually have to think about when you think about your male patients who have been widowed. The other thing to think about is, and I love that picture, by the way. I love you, I know. When you talk about your patients, sometimes your patients are more concerned with the health or the illness of their spouse than they are of their own. And even though that spouse or partner may not be your patient, if you don't address your patient's concerns about their spouse, you're never going to move forward with them. And that goes more so when you talk about surgical patients. You know, if you're in internal medicine, you're trying to refer them to get a hernia fixed, they may never get the hernia fixed if you don't help them figure out what to do with their spouse, their wife, their husband, their partner who has Alzheimer's, who they're the primary care provider for. You'll never get them on the table for surgery. You'll get them on the table for surgery when they had an incarcerated or strangulated hernia, and now it becomes an emergent situation. And now instead of being an outpatient surgery, they're in the hospital for days. So you have to start thinking about, you don't have to delve into the spouse's medical issues. That's none of your business, quite frankly. And honestly, for HIPAA, it's against the law. But, you know, if they mention, hey, I'm the primary care provider, essentially, for my spouse, you need to always keep that and document that in your records so that you know moving forward, if you're going to actually make progress with that patient, you need to not only make sure if they ever need something done that you've addressed that, but it also helps as you move forward in your dialogue with your patients that you're saying, hey, how's your husband doing? You know, how's your wife doing? I know that she was battling cancer. How's that going? Okay. When we talk about kids, I know the other day you guys talked about essentially an obstetrical history, right? So it's gravida, para, abortions, and living. It's actually GPLA. So L is where you can basically document, because I heard you guys asking if somebody had a multiple pregnancy, somebody had twins or triplets. So gravida is how many times you were pregnant. Para is how many times you actually delivered a child. Abortions is both elective abortions, but it's also spontaneous abortions. So it's women who could not carry a child to term, okay? And then your living children would be that's where you can add in multiple pregnancies. It's actually where you can even add in like an adoption, okay? Or if somebody used a surrogate. But if you did not birth the baby, you were never gravida, okay? But you have to know number of kids. My one girlfriend, she would be gravida 4, para 3. No, excuse me, gravida 3, para 3, abortion 0, living 4, because she adopted her daughter. Her husband basically said, if you want to have a girl, we'll adopt, but we're not doing this again to get another boy. Yes?
Would twins be the same thing?
Yes. You would add essentially 2. You would add an extra child. And then you could put in parentheses twins. Because I have one friend, another girlfriend, another PA I know, she's gravida 2, para 2, abortion 0, living 4. 2 sets of twins. Okay. They went for a third. You have to be particularly cautious when you talk about children in this day and age, okay? 50% of all fertility issues are actually male-related, believe it or not. So it's not, you know, we always used to say it was the woman's problem. Well, we know that half of the time it can be related to the man. But we know that 1.5 million women in the United States cannot essentially get pregnant, okay? Another upwards of 10% of women might be able to get pregnant, but they cannot carry to term, either because of incompetent cervix or something genetically wrong between husband and wife, okay? But it's 10% of your population of women might be able to get pregnant, but they can't carry to term. So you have to be very cautious with regards to talking about children. A lot of women, basically, I kind of joked with my one friend one time who was doing infertility treatments. It was a bad joke, I admit, okay? But I said, did you ever think about all the money that you spent on birth control and condoms? They were married 15 years before they found out they couldn't get pregnant, okay? So a lot of women delay having children until later in life for things like this, right? For a career, only to come up and find out that they cannot actually get pregnant and or carry a pregnancy to term. So just always be aware of that. Always be aware of families who either have an ill child, because financially that can cause a lot of stress on a marriage and it can cause a lot of stress on a patient, or who have had the death of a child, okay? Truly nobody should have to bury a kid, and it doesn't matter what age. If they died when they were 2 or they died when they were 42, it doesn't matter. That will heavily weigh on the health, both mentally and physically, of your patient. So and it's okay to ask how they died. I think a lot of people are afraid. We always assume, especially if it's a child, that it would be an accidental death, but it might not be. If they had a rare brain tumor, there's one family, I think they actually live in Naples, they have 5 kids. The first, the third have already died. The fifth has the genetic mutation to have essentially an intracranial tumor and will die. Okay, first one died at 18, third one died. Second one is recessive on the trait. Third one has the gene, died at 15. Fourth one is recessive on the trait, so she'll never get it, but she shouldn't have kids. Fifth one has the gene full blood. Okay, so she'll probably die by 13. So it's always important to ask how the child died. Conversely, if you had a woman who had an adult child die, say you have a 84-year-old female, and she has say her daughter died 15 years ago from breast cancer. Probably a good idea that you know that she died from breast cancer, because a lot of women out there have this myth that they can essentially outgrow their risk for breast cancer, and it actually gets worse as you get older. So it would be important and behoove you to say, I'm sorry that your daughter died. How did she die? Oh, she died in an accident. Okay, tragic, but nothing that truly weighs on the health and well-being of your patient versus if they had a young history of cancer. Okay. Tobacco use. Tobacco use is pretty easy. How much do you smoke and how long have you done it for? Okay. So if you smoked a half a pack per day and you smoke times 10 years, then it's 5 pack years of smoking. And we know that the number of pack years of smoking goes directly to the risk for lung cancer, but then you can always freak your patients out. This one always works. When you talk to them about the risk for stroke. Because they all think, oh, if I get lung cancer, I kind of deserve it. But a stroke in my 50s, I don't want to have a stroke in my 50s, because most people know that not everybody dies of a stroke. So we know that smoking goes directly to vascular disease, okay, and has an increased risk of heart attack as well as an increased risk for stroke. It is, on average, most smokers live about 10 years less than non-smokers. It is the #1 cause of preventative deaths in the world. Okay, so that was a huge campaign. I think it was called Millennium 2015. I'm pretty sure they didn't make it there. To essentially decrease the overall risk of smoking nationwide or worldwide. You have to ask not only about smoking, but do people chew and do people dip? Right, because we know that chewing and dipping increases our risk for oral cancer and throat cancer. Actually, laryngeal cancer, the #1 risk for laryngeal cancer is smoking or dipping or chewing. Vaping, I love this. I don't smoke, that's bad for you. I vape. What's that, by the way? Okay. However, what patients don't understand is, yes, it takes away the tobacco, so it takes away the carcinogens. Guess what's still in vape? Nicotine. Guess what causes vascular disease? Nicotine. Okay. So you tell them, oh yeah, you're decreasing your risk for lung cancer. Have a great time with that stroke. And they're like, hold the phone. They don't know, okay? I had an 80-year-old patient one time, and you know, she's this cute little grandma. She wasn't vaping. She's sitting there with her pupper all day long. She was this goes back. This is pre-vape, okay? So she's sitting there, and I was like, oh, were you gardening today? Because her nails looked atrocious. And she's like, no, why? And I'm like, well, because your fingernails, it looks like you were working outside in the dirt. She's like, she dips 2 cans a day. She's 80 and a grandma, like multiple times over. So it's not just for baseball players anymore. Yes.
Does this apply to patches, also just gums and stuff too?
Yes. Yeah. Oh yeah. There's a trauma surgeon who uses Nicorette gum, like bubble gum. Okay. He goes through a couple packs a day. It's still got nicotine in it. Yes, you're not really increasing your risk for lung cancer, but you're causing vessel disease, okay? Sorry, I have to. Fortunately, caffeine intake, yeah, I didn't put that in the slides. Nobody wants to know my caffeine intake. Okay. Alcohol. How much and how often? Okay, so this is where you say, do you have a glass of wine a day or a glass of wine a day? You know? So typically they always talked that a 12-ounce beer equaled about a glass of wine equals about 1 drink, okay? But we're assuming that people actually go to the bar and somebody else pours it for them and that they don't pour it themselves. And I'm thinking that most people don't set it on a scale at home and like weigh it out. No, looks like it's about 6 ounces, okay? So you have to know, and knowing the different alcohol content. Obviously beers are typically 5%, but honestly, you can get some of those like high quality beers now that are like 8 or 9% alcohol. You know, your wines are usually about, why do I know this so much? We'll get there. Your wines are typically about 10 to 14% alcohol, but if you have a patient who drinks port, and that's what they call their wine, port is like 18% alcohol, okay? Versus your scotch is, like a Fireball is always can be up to what, 150 proof? Okay, so if somebody says, oh yeah, I like 3 drinks a day, but their 3 drinks a day or 3 shots of Fireball, that's a problem. And in terms of, you know, putting that patient into the hospital, if you're like, oh yeah, you have pneumonia because you've smoked forever, so we're going to put you into the hospital, and you might actually go through alcohol withdrawal in about a day or 2. Okay, so let's just go ahead and start the Ativan now. Always easier sometimes on those patients. Just think about it moving forward. If you have to admit them, just let them drink. You're not going to fix their alcoholism at that point. But you have to make sure that you know if it's truly causing a problem. So there's certain questions you can ask them. You can ask them the cage questions. So have you ever felt that you ought to cut down on your drinking? Have you ever been annoyed by people criticizing how much you drink? Okay. Have you ever felt guilty about your drinking? Or have you ever had to have an eye opener? Like literally the people who have to have their Bloody Mary in the morning, or their mimosa in the morning, or worse off, a beer in the morning, okay, as an eye opener. This isn't your person who goes for their bachelor party and gets hammered on the weekend in Vegas, okay? This is somebody who has to do this chronically. This is someone that it is starting to affect their marriage, their work, their friendships, okay? They're not showing up for things on time. They've maybe missed, this is maybe their 3rd appointment that they finally didn't cancel this one and actually showed up to the office for. Those are the types of questions that you have to ask your patients. And you can't have the patient say, well, I only drink when I smoke. How often do you smoke? Oh, every day. I only drink when I take clients out, you know, when I have to take them out. How often do you do that? 5 or 6 nights a week, you know. If you don't ask the follow-up question, you just assume, oh, they only drink when they take clients out. That must only be a night or 2 a week. You have to continue to dive and ask that question, okay? Yes?
Why is a beer first thing in the morning worse than Bloody Mary?
It's not.
Oh, you said worse.
No. Well, I mean, it's not worse. It's just that some people in the morning will have a Bloody Mary on a Sunday, not as an eye-opener, but just because they enjoy having a Bloody Mary or they enjoy having a mimosa. That's different than someone who wakes up and they have to pour themselves a Bloody Mary or a mimosa or a beer. It's one thing to do it with brunch every once in a while, but to have to do it every morning to essentially wake up and to essentially continue your buzz. The other dead giveaway is if you have a patient who comes into the hospital in the morning and their blood alcohol in the morning is 100. So they're still drunk from the night before, basically, okay? The other questions that you can ask, these typically work a little bit better on your female population, or even patients from other cultures who maybe maybe would be offended by the cage questions, okay? So these are a little bit more subtle. So how many drinks does it take before you have the first effect of alcohol? I mean, does it take you a bottle of wine before you even feel it? Then that's a problem, okay? It goes to tolerance. Are your close friends worried or complaining about how much you have been drinking? Again, the eye-opener question is still in there. Basically, have you forgotten what happened the night before? Again, this is not the movie The Hangover, okay, where they're putting receipts together. But this is somebody who habitually is having to be told, you know, or as my one friend used to call them, unknown party injury, a UPI, okay? An unknown party injury. How did I get that scrape on my knee? Where'd that bruise come from? Okay? And she has to be told, well, you fell down last night. Okay? That type of stuff becomes an issue. Do you ever feel like you need to cut down on your drinking? Okay, so those questions, that set of questions tends to work a little bit more for women. When we talk about drug use, okay, particularly drug use becomes an issue, especially when you're dealing with patients through the emergency department who might be work comp. We've had multiple times where we've done a tox screen on patients and they come up positive for marijuana, but they're there for a slip and fall that they had at work. All of a sudden that work comp injury goes bye-bye, okay, because their tox screen came up positive. I had one gentleman who was on probation for the sale of cocaine. He also used it, obviously, because I told him, I said, you come in for surgery and I'm going to tox screen you that morning. And if you're positive, I'm going to cancel your case. So he came in and I screened him and I got the results and I said, did you do cocaine? He said, nope. I said, yeah, you did. Okay, tox screen was positive. So I canceled his case. Fortunately, his probation officer did not subpoena his records, because had he subpoenaed his records, he would have gone back to jail. So, but his girlfriend left him there, so he could take a cab home. She was unhappy. But it does. This is typically in most, hospitals what a tox screen will look at. So cocaine is typically in your system for a couple days. Marijuana is in your system for a while as well. So it doesn't have to be that somebody smoked it the night before. They could have smoked it on the weekend. It will still come up positive several days later. But you have to remember other medications that are actually prescribed meds will show up positive on a tox screen as well. So your ADHD meds are going to be some of your amphetamines. So if somebody is on Ritalin, this is where it's very important that you have an accurate med list. You don't want to go in and berate someone for being positive on the tox screen when in fact it is a prescribed medication. Conversely, some of your anti-seizure medication might actually show up as your barbiturates, okay? Now, if your patient doesn't have a history of opioids, him taking his wife's Percocet does not equate to him being okay as being opioid positive, okay? And you have lots of patients that'll say, well, my wife had some Vicodin, or, so-and-so down the street, that's fantastic, had some Percocet, and I just decided to try his to see if it would help, and it didn't, okay? You also have to be, especially coming into the emergency department, very aware of what was given to them en route by paramedics, okay? If they were given Valium en route, it's going to show up positive on their drug screen, all right? But hopefully you would just be able to ask patients, have you done any illicit drugs in the past? Have you done cocaine? Why? Cocaine puts you at increased risk for myocardial infarction, puts you at increased risk for intracranial aneurysms. The minute somebody takes a hit, it instantly doubles their blood pressure. They're walking around at 120 over 80, the minute they take a hit, it goes to 240 over 120, okay? That's why they get the high. So if they're smoking pot and smoking, some patients will say, do you smoke tobacco? No, that's bad for you. That stuff will cause cancer. Pot? Oh yeah, I smoke pot. That's not bad for you, okay? Killing brain cells, but whatever. So yeah, and then I have one patient and he drove out to Denver because it was illegal in Denver, and drove back with it and crossed state lines. It is not, several state lines, I might add. So it is not legal here, okay? So you have to make sure that you actually can have that dialogue with your patients. So stressors in life, basically you guys have a large stressor right here, just being in school, right? Add to that if you're married and got kids and all the other fun stuff. But basically, you have to generally ask about kind of what's going on in someone's life. And the way that I always, once I got to know patients, the way that I would always ask patients, I just say, what's new and exciting? You know, and half the time they'd say, well, nothing's exciting. And I'd be like, well, that's a good thing, because sometimes exciting stuff isn't good stuff. But it was just a way to open up to the patients so that they could tell you anything else that might be going on in their life. All right. So we have to ask about family, how the kids are doing, if they have a spouse, if they have parents. Remember that we're dealing with populations, say the 40, 50, 60-year-olds that might be dealing with an ill parent, or maybe a parent that's now coming to live with them that might be adding more stress to the household or stress to the marriage. Okay. Then we want to ask about anything at work. Have they had a recent job change? Are there layoffs at work? Are they considering grad school? All of those things can add additional stress to your patient and therefore be reflected on both their psychological health as well as their physical health. One thing to always know about is just whether they're insured versus uninsured in terms of stressors, because Levaquin, there's no generic for it. So if you have your patient and she's got a UTI and you want to give her Levaquin, that's fantastic. 10 tablets at Publix will cost you $273. Versus if you give her Cipro, which is free. So just knowing that little bit about the information, not that you're doing the billing in the department. Believe me, patients ask me billing questions all the time, and I'm like, let me take you to this person, okay? But just knowing whether they're insured or not, knowing whether they have prescription insurance, right away, you're helping not only the patient's stress, but yours. Because if you send that patient with a prescription to Publix or to Walmart, guess what's going to happen? You're either going to A, get a phone call, or B, get another visit to the office. So you might as well save everybody time and just write them a prescription that will be covered. Levaquin will be covered if they have insurance. They don't have any insurance. They don't have any coverage, so give them some. Okay. So just those little tweaks of things. And those are things that as you move forward and kind of get out into practice, either UpToDate has it or Epocrates, which is, I love Epocrates, it's like a pharmacist in your pocket, actually has the exact cost of everything at every different pharmacy, okay, and tells you what's free. So it just is your little cheat sheet, okay? When we talk about employment, employment is more so than just what you do. So lots of people are PAs. There's the difference between the person who is a physician assistant who works in primary care all day and maybe has a complaint of low back pain versus the patient who's a PA and works in surgery all day, maybe orthopedics, and has low back pain, okay? Because the PA who works in primary care, yeah, she's sitting, so maybe she's not as active, maybe she has a bad chair, maybe that ergonomically needs to be changed, but the person who's in orthopedic spine surgery every day is probably wearing lead, which probably weighs a good 5 to 10 pounds for 12 hours every day. So you have a little bit different conversation with those patients based on simply their employment and what they do every day. It also goes to exposure. So we'll take the PA again. You know, you have a PA who's in primary care, the likelihood that they're being exposed to radiation all day long, probably not happening, right? You have a PA who's in surgery, you better hope that they're wearing full lead and leaded glasses and a thyroid shield because they're exposed to radiation all day long, okay? My numbers when I was in endovascular neurosurgery were off the charts for radiation. Almost to the point where if they would have had another PA, they probably would have made me take time off. But they didn't have anybody else to do my job, so let up and get back in there, okay? So those conversations you need to have. You also need to have in terms of if you're, it's a difference between, I work at a vineyard, which sounds like a fantastic job, doesn't it? I work at a vineyard. Well, do you work in sales? Like, are you in the tasting room all day long? Or are you out in the field exposed to all the chemicals? So that type of exposure, it's different than somebody who just says, I work for a winery, and you leave it at that. Okay? You have to dive. What do you do there? And it also goes to, do you enjoy your job? Is it stable? Are you thinking about leaving? It helps with get back to those stressors that are involved. Their level of education. Sometimes employment goes to their level of education, but not always. Okay? Who's the guy who owns Facebook? What? Mark Zuckerberg, right? Something like that. That's close. I think he dropped out of Harvard, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So I don't even think he has a college degree. I don't think anybody would question his intelligence. So maybe his level of education, he doesn't have his bachelor's degree. he's probably not stupid. So you want to always talk about level of education completed, just because it allows you to change your dialogue that you have with the patient. For somebody who maybe completed only high school, you might want to, as you talk to them, simplify things a little bit, but also as you're just conversing with them and what verbiage they use, you'll know how you can talk to them. And in terms of when you get to your assessment and plan, and you get to your diagnosis, and you get to your plan, you can say, well, you have cholecystitis. And for somebody who's also in the medical profession, they'll understand that. For somebody who's not, you say your gallbladder's not working right. It needs to come out. Okay? It's the same thing, you're just saying it two different ways. Okay? And level of education, level of how far they have gotten in their education definitely helps you with that. Don't ever assume that someone who does not speak English properly or fluently, I guess I should say, is not intelligent. It is simply maybe not their first language. Okay? If you were fluent in Spanish, or you were fluent in Creole or German, you'd probably be able to communicate just fine. And those are three populations that we truly have quite a density of here in Lee and Collier County. Okay? I conversed one time with a patient. It was bad. I was using it's called a blue phone. We didn't have a German translator in the hospital. So I was using a blue phone to translate and tell the patient that he had a brain tumor. And we were having this nice dialogue, and everything kind of gets translated back and forth. And it's hard because you're like looking right at this person, and then you're waiting for an answer to come through your ear. God bless you, right at the point where I would have said, your tumor's benign, call's dropped. Fantastic. So through like sign language, like rogue sign language, I just ended up calling his daughter, and we just passed the cell phone back and forth, because I'm like, I'm not gonna have this call dropped again, and I'm not gonna wait another 15 minutes to tell this guy, once I finally get a German translator, that the tumor is benign. Okay. So you always have to make sure that you know the primary language of the patient. This guy was very intelligent, but he didn't speak a word of English. So we would have had just a fun conversation had I not either been able to use a blue phone or talk to his daughter. Okay. Based on I think it's Title 6 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, you have to be able to communicate to that patient. In general, it's never advised to use a family member. Okay. Culturally, a lot of that comes from people don't necessarily tell them what is actually being said. Part of that is there's not everything in English translates into Spanish or Creole or German or Italian. Okay. And part of it is they just don't want to tell them. There are some protective cultural issues that you certainly don't want to have a 12-year-old be the one to have to tell mom or dad that they have cancer. Okay, but the 12-year-old might be the only one who actually is fluent in English in the household. So it's always important, and most offices these days, at least for Spanish, have somebody who is bilingual, fluently bilingual. But you want to make sure that if you're trying to tell someone something, that they actually get the right thing translated to them. And even if there isn't an exact word in Spanish or German to translate that phrase or that diagnosis, if you have someone who is fluent in both languages, they'll figure out a way to say it and get the proper message to your patient, versus depending on someone's child to do that for you. Okay? But it is required, and if you use a translator, you always have to document in your chart. A translator was used for this conversation today. Okay? It just helps to save you long term. Yes, ma'am.
If you're using a professional interpreter versus using, like, in our office, a lot of the nurses are bilingual, and they do the translation. Should you still make a note of it?
Oh yeah, always. If it was somebody in the office, and I just say, the nurse in the office who's bilingual was used for translation. I don't necessarily put their name down. In your hospital, a lot of times, like at Health Talk, I would grab like the housekeeper, because the housekeeper spoke Creole. And at 9 o'clock at night, she was the quickest person I could get. So if you're trying to get things done efficiently for your patient, you kind of all hands on deck, Yes.
So for patients that can speak like really choppy, basic English, or you can speak basic Spanish, you would still want to get a translator in this situation, communication in English to like call your daughter, whoever you know in their family that speaks English?
You would, if you're really having a long dialogue with them, you know, if you're talking surgical planning, treatment planning, you need an interpreter there. You know, if it's, I speak a little bit of Spanish, prime example. I had one guy, we had seen him all the time, he was a trauma patient. This goes back a long time. Okay, this goes back like 15 years. And he was sitting in the hospital. He was a closed head injury, but we had seen him. He was on our service for like 2 weeks. You know, probably not 2 weeks. Let's go a week. So I went in with my boss, and I was examining him because I can speak a little bit of Spanish, enough to say, open your eyes, move your hands, wiggle your toes, your basic neuro exam. That's all I needed out of him that morning. Except my boss comes in right behind me, and he says, and I'm like, Sakura Lima, is nice, you know, and he's doing everything for me. And my boss, who'd never heard me speak Spanish before, comes in and he goes, I know you spoke Spanish. I'm like, what? I don't speak that much. And he's like, tell him we're gonna take his Foley out. And I go, we're gonna take your Foley out. Because, you know, my Spanish begins and ends at a certain point. So you have to be aware. I've had multiple patients where I walk in and all I want to do is literally just check their dressing real quick. And I half the time thought they were asleep, you know. It's probably my 3rd visit, and I'm just looking to make sure there's no hematoma, you know. And they wake up, and I've said a little bit, you know, buenos dias, ¿cómo está? You know, and then they start rattling off in Spanish, and I'm like, and I go running out of the room. So if you're going to have a real dialogue with your patient, you have to have an interpreter there. Okay. When we talk about religion and cultural issues, so kind of getting back to a hospital setting, if you're going to ask about religion, one way that I always asked for emergent purposes was, you know, do you have any religious preference? And half the time it kind of caught patients off guard, or not patients, their family off guard, because they haven't even seen their loved one. Their loved one's back in the trauma bay, their loved one's back in the ED, you know. And one thing I always said, because I'm Catholic, is I just want you to know, if, you know, do you have a religious preference? I'm Catholic. I would want this patient to have last rites. And right away, they would always know the severity of the situation. Because most patients, even if they're not Catholic or they're not Jewish or, you know, Muslim or whatever, they know kind of the severity of certain statements. So that's why I would always ask that of my ER patients or my trauma patients. But there are certain things that you need to know about in terms of faith and culture. If you ask somebody, you know, again, going back to your office setting now, if you consider yourself a faithful person, you know, I had one priest when I was in grad school, actually in PA school, and I would always show up late with my friend who was also Catholic, and, you know, he would talk about us being the cafeteria Catholics, because we didn't make it every Sunday. But you have to ask, do you have a cultural religion that you believe in? Do you go to services? Partially also because in terms of especially your older population who might be widowed, that might be a source that you can actually draw upon for support if they're recovering from surgery, okay? And it doesn't just have to be a religion. There's a group in town of women who do triathlons, and one woman ended up having to have hip surgery. And basically 6 of the other women rallied and took turns taking her to her physical therapy. So if you didn't know that they kind of did stuff and they were involved in various groups, you would be all worried about setting up home health and transport and all this kind of stuff, not realizing that they already have that built in to their culture. So knowing that information in the background just helps you moving forward with regards to their diagnosis. Do they have any important beliefs that influence their life? Understanding, like the prime example is those that are Jehovah's Witness, which if anybody can still explain that to me all these years, and I just don't get it. Anyways, they do not receive blood products, okay? I had a patient many, many years ago. I keep telling these stories, but I had a patient many years ago. His name was Robert, very nice gentleman, diagnosed with primary CNS lymphoma. And he needed blood. He needed blood before he was going to go to the OR. He and his wife were Jehovah's Witness. And I said, okay, if that's your preference, then we'll figure it out. But this is going to be hard, you know? And his wife and him said, well, we're actually leaving the faith, but please don't tell our parents. Okay. Visiting hours were over at 8. Blood went up at 8:05, okay? Every night he would get blood because he needed it, but he didn't want his parents to know. and all the red bags were out of the room by the morning when visiting hours were back up and the patient's parents could come back, okay? So you have to just have that open dialogue with your patients. I don't understand that because they actually will take organs. I know. Anyways, yeah, they will. They will. It's up to the patient's preference as to whether they can take an organ or not. But blood is not. Yes.
Some of their churches vary on their blood products.
Exactly, because they'll actually won't take 5% albumin, but they'll take 4. Believe it or not. Yeah.
Actually, their halls don't vary. They don't vary.
Yeah. So we just diluted albumin. I had to give it albumin to a patient one time. She didn't want blood, but she would accept 4%. So we diluted it down and gave her 4 instead of 5. So, but make sure patient get off the table. That's what I care about. So community, again, are they part of a group? Are they part of people that you can draw upon? Several of your religious communities actually have, big support groups in terms of transportation. They'll help get people to and from services. Believe it or not, they'll help them get to and from doctor's appointments, physical therapy appointments. So it's important to know that going in. And then, are there any other issues with regards to your culture or your religion that you want to address? So we had one woman who would always come in with her husband. She was Muslim, and she always had her headdress, and so she didn't want to, uncover her hair in front of my surgeon, who was a man, but he had to examine her thyroid, so she had to have all of her neck exposed. So the way that we addressed it is I would always stay in the room as well. And that way there was just another woman in the room. Okay, so just simple things that can make your patient feel that much more comfortable, and they therefore will not only come back to you for all of their care in the future, but they'll feel so much more comfortable addressing all the other fun stuff that we're going to get to talk about. Activity level. An Xbox is not activity. A virtual world, virtual games are in fact virtual. They do not, shockingly, burn any calories. Just because you own a treadmill does not mean you use a treadmill, okay? And using it does not mean to hang laundry on. So you have to make sure that you know how active the patient is, and if it's been a change. If somebody's always been active, and all of a sudden they're starting to come in with joint pain, okay, well, it might just be a chronic issue, a little flare-up. But if somebody comes in and they've never exercised before, and they've now decided to train for a marathon, okay, you're going to have a little bit different dialogue with that patient than someone who's been avidly fit all of their life. You got to make sure their heart's stable, first of all. So you just got to make sure that how often do they exercise? Have they been consistent at it? Why are they trying to do it? Do they have a certain goal in mind? Are they trying to lose weight? And they're not being overly aggressive. So that's how you address in terms of exercise and activity level. Diet and nutrition. Okay, maybe caffeine should be in here. So do they have any dietary restrictions that are either religious or cultural or just things that they don't like? My mom used to always tell me that the nice way to say that you didn't like certain things is just say that you have an allergy to it, and that way nobody will make you eat it. So I'm allergic to strawberries. So if you're vegetarian or you're vegan, certainly for those patients, making sure that especially if they're a woman and they have heavy menstrual cycles, and they're decided to go vegan or vegetarian, are they getting enough protein in their diet? Okay, because why are they chronically anemic? That type of thing, you have to make sure that they're adequately getting proper nutrition. Do they have any allergies or intolerances? So we all know about gluten, but fortunately these days you can't like spit without hitting a restaurant that doesn't have a gluten-free menu, right? Which is fantastic. But those types of issues, lactose intolerance, and then your true allergies. Does somebody have a peanut allergy? If somebody's going to be anaphylactic, probably a good idea if they carry an EpiPen, okay? And then discuss how they feel about their body image. So especially for your female population, but this goes with your male population as well. Unfortunately, they're not immune to being bulimic. They're not immune to being anorexic. So you have to ask, how do you feel? Is this kind of the weight you've always been? Especially if you see somebody who comes in who has dropped 20 pounds, hopefully that was an intentional 20-pound weight loss, because if it's an unintentional 20-pound weight loss, what's the thing we're worried about? Cancer, okay? The big C word, always has to be on the radar. So you have to ask, have you been training more? That's why if you know at a baseline that this has always been an active person and they've got a big event coming up and that's why they're losing weight. Or if it's somebody who's been really trying to be good about diet, join Weight Watchers, join Jenny Craig, you know, you can congratulate them on that 20-pound weight loss rather than being worried about the 20-pound weight loss. Okay? Yes.
For allergies, you would ask if each allergy, like what their reaction would be to it.
Yes, because you know, if they have food allergies, some of it just might be an intolerance. And some patients think that that's a true allergy when it's not. Even for drugs, you know, morphine causes me to projectile vomit like I'm from The Exorcist. You know, that's not really an allergy, it's an intolerance. But I put it down as an allergy, okay? So truly allergies are horrible welts, anaphylaxis, you know, a little rash and a little bit itchy, that's more of an intolerance. But you kind of have to delve into what do you call an allergy? Because most patients think that they get a little bit of GI upset when they have a little bit of milk or cheese, that it's an allergy, you know, and they're intolerant to everything. You know, you have to educate your patients. Okay. All right, military service, you want to know about active duty patients. You know, we have lots of patients who are deployed for military service, especially even whether they're, you know, active duty all the time or reservists. What's required of them every year? Have they been deployed? How many times have they been deployed? If they're retired, you know, if they were veterans of the war, World War II, we still have World War II vets alive, right? Korean or Vietnam War, what were they exposed to? Were they exposed to Agent Orange? It goes to a lot of your other medical issues, you know, post-traumatic stress disorder, kind of even what they just experienced and kind of their education level, what they've been through in life, their life experiences. So you always want to know about their military service. All right, so domestic violence. These are the latest statistics, which I was not real happy with. I got it. So worldwide, 35% of women have experienced either physical and or sexual intimate partner or non-partner sexual violence. 1 in 3. So if you think that this isn't going to happen in your practice, regardless of what field you go into, you are wrong, okay? You have to be aware of it. You don't necessarily have to ask all the creepy, weird questions all the time that will make people feel uncomfortable, but you have to have it on your radar as to could this be potentially a cause? You've got a woman coming back into the emergency department, and this is her 5th trip to the ER, and now she's got a black eye, but before she had a broken bone, and I fell down the stairs. You know, I tripped while running. Well, if I say that, I actually probably did trip while running. Okay. You know, I had too much to drink the night before and I fell. I don't really remember what happened. Okay. If you start to see stories that don't add up, they don't add up for a reason. So you have to start asking the more uncomfortable questions. In the United States, 12 million victims, men and women, of intimate partner violence, and there's more than 3 murders every day by either a boyfriend or a spouse. Yes?
How would you go about like getting, like what if the person's there, like the spouse is there, like how would you go about getting them out of the room?
I just ask them to leave. And the key thing is if they don't leave. So if the wife is kind of looking at you, or the spouse, I should say, husband or wife, and the spouse is a little too guarded, you know, you can be like, you know, hey, can you go grab her purse in the car, or can you go get something in the car for me? Make up an excuse. Yes.
I was just gonna say to that point, you know, when my wife was pregnant, he made the point that he would say, hey, I gotta ask her some personal stuff or
Yeah.
whatever. And if you have to leave the room, and he did it with every, you know, you got a patient, you leave the room for 2 minutes and you come out, okay, you come back in.
Right. You just kind of get in the habit of doing the same thing every single time. So you can ask the safety questions. So you ask, do you feel safe in your home? Are there any stresses? Do you feel afraid? Understanding that women will leave their spouse or their boyfriend or whatever 7 times before leaving for good. The safety issue, you can't just sit there and be judgmental about it and say, well, if he hits you, you have to leave him. You know, love doesn't hit, and you have to leave him. Because you don't know what her situation is. Women who have children aren't going to leave their spouse unless they have a plan of what they're going to do with their kids, okay? And 75% of women who leave really without a plan and they decide to come back Those are the ones that are killed. So don't just be lecturing to her about what she has to do. Provide a safe environment for her, open the dialogue so that she can talk. If you're in the office with this woman and she all comes in because, you know, she's not feeling well, and maybe she's not feeling well because she got punched in the stomach the night before, you start talking to her. She probably isn't going to leave her spouse or her boyfriend that day, but maybe 3 months from now, because you've allowed that dialogue, maybe it makes the change in her able to have a plan to go somewhere, okay? This is where it becomes important and behooves you, even if you're in primary care or if you're in internal medicine, get to know your social workers in the hospital. Those people are fantastic, okay? You call somebody up and you say, hey, listen, what resources do we have for this person, right? There's a thrift store in town, it's called Second Act. They will actually help to clothe women, like with a nice suit, before they go on a job interview, especially if they've left. So there's different houses and safe places they can go, and you just have to be able to have the resources to provide that to your patient, okay? Do they have any family and friends, and do they have an emergency plan? You know, do they have money literally stashed in the cookie jar or under the mattress? Do they have something that they could do that from a moment's notice they could be out the door? Okay, think about, what was the movie, Julia Roberts? Long time ago. Sleeping with the Enemy. Okay, remember she had a bag packed, she had cash, she had planned forever to leave, but you have to have the right timing. So just make sure that you're open to talk to your patients about that, but probably at that moment, evaluating them in the office or in the ER, they're not going to leave right then. And half the time, even if they say right then that they're going to press charges, they drop them. Okay? And then they're going to be the ones that are going to have to deal with the repercussions for making those statements. It's not like you're taking the patient home. Okay? All right. Moving on. Where are we in time? All right, let's take a break. And we'll come back. And then we'll get to the different stuff.